Hi everybody, I'm Crystal Haynes. Tonight on Greater Boston, widespread slowdowns on the T are just the latest issues to plague the struggling transit system. How are riders faring with the resulting delays and what needs to happen to get the T under control? Then, the most significant national abortion case since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. The head of the ACLU of Massachusetts joins me on how a Texas lawsuit could limit abortion access across the country. If you live in and around Boston, you are no stranger to the nightmare that is the T. For years, commuters have dealt with derailments, accidents, electrical issues, delays, slowdowns, and more. The latest headache? Speed restrictions. On certain sections of several MBTA lines, train speeds are still capped at 25 miles per hour or less. And on the Green Line and the Mattapan Trolley, the limit is in effect across the entire route. This is a cutback from a MBTA decision last week to impose a global speed restriction across the board after a site visit from the Department of Public Utilities found several track defects. The slowdown comes as the T is already operating on a reduced service schedule, cuts that were put in place last June and remain as the agency addresses a shortage of dispatchers, operators, and trains, preventing them from restoring to full service. The MBTA's advice to riders: allow an extra 20 minutes of travel time for their commute. So joining me to discuss all of this and, of course, the frustration, our State Representative Mike Connolly, who represents Cambridge and Somerville, and Jared Johnson, Executive Director of Transit Matters. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So, Representative Connolly, I would love to talk about what you are hearing from your constituents about having this latest headache being the slowdowns.
You know, it's truly a disaster. And, you know, what really gets me perhaps more than anything are the stories from constituents who tell me, you know, I'm very busy, I'm working, I'm raising a family, and I don't get to tuck my kid in at night because I cannot rely on the train to get me home after a long day at work. And so we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we have to invest in people. We have to focus on safety, and we have a lot to deal with the MBTA's budget. And I'm sure we'll get into a lot of that.
Yeah. Jared, you know, I know that you speak with T riders, you help represent them in some spaces. I mean, what are you hearing from folks as it seems like insult to injury?
Yeah, you know, we're hearing from riders that they're turning to driving where they didn't used to drive into the city, but they just say, you know, I just can't afford to be late. You know, I can't afford to leave, 20 to 30 minutes early and then still wind up late. So this is really having an impact. And I think the rep is correct in describing it as a disaster. And so we need to be taking it seriously, and we need to be marshaling the resources to fix it.
Well, speaking of resources, you know, Mike, talk to me about what you think should be happening with this massive budget that the T actually has.
Sure. Well, you know, there is some good news, I would say, and that is last year, Massachusetts, thanks to our voters, took a major step toward progress when we passed the Fair Share Amendment so that we can finally start making bigger investments in transportation. But that will take time to see, and there's a lot that needs to happen. I mean, right now, we have a shortage of bus drivers. We need more engineering talent, more project management talent, not to mention a general manager. So there's a lot of people investment that needs to happen at the T while we focus on safety, while we focus on operations, and while we focus on making capital investments so that the system can hopefully someday become world-class.
And just to follow up on that, do you think that the shortage in staff to run the T is because of the environment at the T, or is there a larger issue that's happening?
I think there's a lot of factors. Certainly when Governor Baker took office 8 years ago, I know he focused a lot on capital investment, and there was a great focus on getting money out the door. And that was fine, but I think where the previous administration dropped the ball was in considering operations, considering safety, considering investments in the talent that can deliver. You know, here in my district, I'm so proud to represent Cambridge and Somerville. we have seen progress with the completion of the Green Line extension. But I will say a lot of people raised their eyebrows when we learned the general manager of that project, John Dalton, would be leaving town. And so that was a case where the T went out, they procured talent, that talent delivered, and now it's not clear that that talent will remain in the agency. And so I think there has to be a huge focus on investing in people. We can't simply outsource and then turn to consultants to tell us what to do. There's a place for that, but there has to be a place for investing in people, developing their capacity, and allowing them to help us turn this around.
And Jared, I would ask, from a rider's perspective, and I know you also deal with a lot of other folks who are within the MBTA, is this lack of staff being felt acutely as people are trying to get on the train, but also with the trains being late and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, as you mentioned, earlier, it's an issue with the control center, which is leading to longer wait times between trains. It's the lack of bus drivers, which has led to a cut last year. I think we're coming up on a year of the T cutting back bus service to match the amount of operators they had. And then just recently, there's a report that's come out that says that even under this reduced schedule, they're still not able to meet the bus trips that they've scheduled, and so those bus trips are being dropped. And even this latest incident with the track conditions and with the slow zones, this is related to the team not having enough maintenance workers to get maintenance done every night. And so I think the rep is spot on about how we put an emphasis into the capital budget, and that was great, but not thinking about that operating budget has consequences, and so that really has to be the focus of this administration, is not letting the foot off the gas, excuse the metaphor, on capital. We probably need to do even more on capital, but we have to have a commensurate focus on operations as well. There's just impacts being felt, wide across the system.
How much of this is due to the fact that there's an acting GM, but there hasn't been a GM that stayed on past a few years?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. Not having that continuity and that stability, has been difficult. But I think the challenge for the T is that, I have no insight into when we'll get a new GM. I wish I knew that information. But the problem is that we can't wait for that new GM. And so, I think the interim GM that we have now is someone who's been at the T for a number of years, knows agency inside and out. And so I think we have to start that process now. And when we get the new GM, that's great, and they can jump in. But riders need to be able to get to work tomorrow, and so starting that process is really critical. And we shouldn't be waiting until we get a new GM, because without having the vision, without having the vision from the administration, without having support in terms of resources, a new GM is just going to walk in and spend 6 months getting up to speed with no progress. So it's really about the fundamentals.
And Representative Connolly, as I think about the slow zones and what lines have seemed to always be affected, it feels like it's always along low-income census tracts, low-income areas, communities of colors, working folks parts of the city that are largely and most greatly impacted by something like the slow zones, something like the work, something like the lines being delayed or rides being canceled.
It's so true. Somebody did the thought experiment the other day. Imagine if the state government woke up tomorrow and said all highways will be reduced to 35 miles an hour. It would not be acceptable. You would see many more elected officials on the front lines demanding that cannot stand. But when it comes to the transit riding public, these unacceptable conditions have been acceptable. And you rattled off all of the slow zones, dozens and dozens of block speed restrictions, global speed restrictions, and then the bus service, where the MBTA is so far behind in hiring bus drivers, hundreds upon hundreds of bus drivers, the positions are vacant. We are unable to fulfill a standard bus schedule. So I would agree with Jared insofar as, and also, former Secretary Jim Aloisi made the point that the general manager is not going to be a hero who can walk in and fix it all. You know, we really have to focus on filling all of the different positions. And I do give Jeff Gonville some credit. You know, I think he handled a terrible situation last week with some transparency. And also just a quick note, you know, I don't know if people noticed, but Governor Healy has made some shakeups at the Department of Public Utilities. And this most recent set of slowdowns is a result of DPU actually starting to do oversight in a real way for the first time. So those were some very encouraging signs, but there is so much more that needs to happen.
Jared, you know, I heard about the slowdowns and immediately saw on Twitter people noticing the communities that will be the most affected.
Absolutely. You know, it's folks who don't have the ability to show up late to work. You know, if I'm running late on the train, I can, you know, join in from a Zoom meeting. I can, you know, do some things on my phone. But for a lot of low-income workers, a lot of working class folks, you know, they clock in. And so that time spent on the train has a big impact on them. We're talking about parents for whom, you know, a $25 late fee for picking up their kids from childcare is a big deal. And so absolutely these things impact low-income workers. And when we look at where low-income workers are more likely to live, they're more likely to live out towards the ends of the subway lines. And so, you know, they might not have the opportunity to just catch a cheap Uber or Lyft ride or just bike there, you know, never mind the fact that the winter, but, you know, these are folks who already have a long commute. And then we're adding, you know, 20 minutes on top of it, which, you know, the red line is already about 35 to 40 minutes slower from Alewife to Braintree already, and we're talking about adding more time on top of that. So it absolutely is a time tax on low-income folks.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It is a time tax. In the last minute or a half or so, I would love to know what you both think the Healy administration needs to do going forward, or has done, or has in the works, as to help fix this problem for riders who are watching this, saying what Jared was saying. We need help now. We need solutions now. And Rep. Connolly, I'll start with you.
Certainly, I think we need a new version of the Fiscal Management Control Board. The board of the MBTA right now is in a bit of flux and limbo, so the governor and the legislature need to work together on that. I support Mayor Wu in her request to have the city of Boston represented on the board. And how much time do you have? I could talk for hours about what needs to happen, but I'll just come back to where I started to say, there has to be a focus on investing in people. We can't nickel and dime our way out of this. We have to invest in human talent, people who can work for the T for, you know, long periods of time and gain experience. We have to focus on safety, and we have to deal with an operating budget that is about to explode in the next fiscal year and create even more deficits and challenges.
Mm-hmm. Jared.
Absolutely agreed with everything, but I'd also add too that, you know, we need the administration has to make transit a priority. I think, you know, oftentimes people try not to engage with it because they might not think it's a winning issue, but, you know, this is something that has an impact across so many different avenues. You know, our work on housing and on smart growth, that does not work without the T. The ability to meet our climate goals will fail without the T. You know, our strategy to remain competitive economically will fail without the T. And so it really is. We have to make transit a priority, and we have to realize that we, you know, this used to be one of the best transit agencies in the country, if not the world. But that was when you had an administration, you had legislatures, when you had a community that was willing to put in the resources. And so we have to realize that the T is an investment. There was a report from years ago, even before the pandemic, that said, you know, on about a $3 billion a year budget, the T produces an impact of about $11 billion. And that impact is felt in every single corner of the state. And so, again, transit has to be a priority because it's connected to so many avenues and ways that we want to make our Commonwealth better, more equitable, more economically vibrant and fairer.
Well, we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Representative Mike Connolly and Jared Johnson, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Crystal.
Next up, a look at a Texas lawsuit that could impact access to abortion across the country, including right here in Massachusetts. Today, a federal judge in the state heard arguments in a case looking to reverse the FDA approval of a common abortion medication. More than 2 decades ago, the agency approved Mifepristone, which, when taken along with another drug, Mifepristone, causes a medically induced abortion. Together, those drugs are used in more than half of all abortions in the U.S. And though the lawsuit was filed in Texas, depending on the ruling from this Texas judge, who actually was appointed in 2019 by President Trump, it could halt the sales of Mifepristone in all states nationwide, regardless of local abortion laws. Joining me now to discuss all of this and the impact it has on abortion rights across the country is Carol Rose, Executive Director of the ACLU of Massachusetts. Hi, Carol.
Hi, great to be here.
So talk to me about the merits of this Texas case and how it could have such a widespread effect.
Right. Well, so this is a case that was filed intentionally in Amarillo, Texas, by a group of anti-abortion extremists who were particularly forum shopping. They wanted to have Judge Matthew Kaczmarek, who has a history of ruling against things like contraception and LGBTQ equality. And so they're asking this judge if he would put a ban on the use of FDA's approval of Mifepristone, an incredibly safe drug that's been used for over 20 years, in an effort to try to ban access to abortion nationwide. And so today was a really high stakes hearing on that case that took about 4 hours today, and we're expecting a ruling from the judge any moment.
Why would it impact the abortion laws or rights that we have here in Massachusetts?
Well, first, to be really clear, no matter what happens today, abortion will still be legal here in Massachusetts, at least for the time being. So there's a number of ways the judge could rule. First, he could grant an emergency injunction in part. So he would uphold the FDA's approval of Mifepristone, which happened back in 2000, but say that the FDA has to reinstate certain restrictions, like you have to show up in person at a doctor's office in order to get the drugs, which would obviously really negatively impact people who live in remote or rural areas, or people who don't have the ability to travel to a doctor's office. Or the judge might also issue an emergency injunction in full that would say the FDA has to stop the approval completely of this particular abortion medicine, Mifepristone, and that would impact the ability for everybody nationwide. Now, it's going to be challenged almost immediately, so people should know that. And there are other ways that people can access abortion care. Misoprostol is another drug often used in conjunction with Mifepristone, but misoprostol would still be available, and so abortions will still continue. But this is part of a nationwide strategy by anti-abortion extremists to try to ban abortion for everyone throughout the country.
Well, that was going to be my next question. We saw Roe v. Wade be overturned, and there was a prediction out there that we would see cases like these pop up across the country.
Right. Well, I mean, I think this is part of a larger strategy. So, here in Massachusetts, our legislature and our governor have done wonderful work in ensuring that we have the strongest protections for abortion patients and providers here, as well as, by the way, these drugs are used for miscarriage care. And so when we recognize that abortion is really health care, we see that this is a direct attack on access to health care across the country. Because the Supreme Court ruled in the Dobbs case overthrowing Roe versus Wade that there's no federal constitutional protection, now we have a patchwork with each state having its own approach to ensuring or denying abortion care. This attempt to try to get Judge Kaczmarek to issue a nationwide ban to force the FDA to ban access to Mifepristone is sort of a test case to see if they can begin to get the ban nationwide and then to move in other ways to ban all forms of abortion care nationwide and miscarriage care.
What do we see as the danger of this type of thing? So if this drug, which has been proven safe for 20 years, then is off of the market, what happens then?
Right. Well, I mean, first of all, it is incredibly safe. I mean, this was the focus of today's hearing. Judge Kaczmarek was asking the lawyers what they thought about this sort of process for approving Mifepristone. And it took more than 4 years to get the FDA approval back in 2000. And it is safer than Tylenol. It is safer than Viagra. So this is an incredibly safe abortion medicine. It's an incredibly safe medicine. And so, the impact that this is going to have is, once again, to make it more difficult for people to access abortion and miscarriage care. Here in Massachusetts, we're likely to see an increase in people coming to Massachusetts or seeking help from Massachusetts providers as a way to continue to get access to abortion care. Because people know that if you need this in your life, you're going to find a way to get there. It's just harder for people who are poor, harder for people who live in rural areas. And we at the ACLU really believe strongly that it's important that everyone have equal access. Abortion care is health care, and people should have access to health care.
I know that when these cases come up, doctors who do provide abortion care tend to end up being targets, and whether that's folks trying to target their licensure, folks target whether, the operations that they're performing or the prescriptions that they're writing, in terms of legal matters, like, are there doctors that are trying to shore up and create protections for themselves right now?
Well, absolutely. And the ACLU, working together with our allies at Reproductive Equity Now here in Massachusetts, have actually opened an abortion legal hotline for patients or providers who have questions about making sure that they stay out of trouble with the law. And they can call that number at 833-309-6301. That's 833-309-6301. In addition, our allies over at Planned Parenthood of Massachusetts have assured us that they have the ability to continue to provide abortion and miscarriage care for people who need it. And so we in Massachusetts are really leading the nation. We have the best law in the nation to make sure people can access abortion care when they need it. And so despite these efforts that are taking place in remote places like Amarillo, Texas, to try to change the law for everybody across the country, the ACLU and our allies are going to continue to fight back against that, continue to ensure that both patients and providers can access this fundamental right to health care.
How successful, in your opinion, your experience, what is this case in Texas going to be, and others? Is it sort of like there's no way to know? Does it necessarily depend on each case-by-case circumstance?
Well, it's going to be litigated. A lot of lawyers are going to be busy for the next few years because the Supreme Court has left us with this patchwork of state-by-state different conflicting laws. And so I think this case is going to be fought out for a long time. There's another case that's coming out of from attorneys general out of Washington state. They're actually challenging the FDA, saying they shouldn't have any restrictions and going in the other direction. The ACLU has a similar case from 2017. And so there's going to be battles in the courts on both sides. And so I think the most important thing is, in the meantime, that the people in Massachusetts and people who are coming to Massachusetts understand that they're still protected to the full extent of the law here in Massachusetts, and that the ACLU and our allied groups are there to make sure that access to abortion and miscarriage care is available not only in the law, but in reality.
All right, Carol Rose, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
For months, shortages of the medication Adderall have made it hard for ADHD patients to get a hold of their prescriptions, which many say have been life-changing. What's behind this shortage, and when will it be over? GBH News' Connolly has the answers.
So you've been calling around to get your ADHD medication. What used to be an easy refill you didn't think twice about is now an hours or days-long drama every time you need more. So how'd we get here? And when is it gonna get better? I'm Connolly with some quick context. So tell me if this sounds familiar. You call your doctor for your tried and true ADHD medication. Your doctor calls it into the pharmacy, and they're out. They call around to other pharmacies and find one 15 miles away that has a slightly different version of the same general prescription. You call your doctor back, and they call in the new prescription to the faraway pharmacy. You race there before they run out too, only to find that there is no generic version of that one available, meaning it costs 3 times as much. You pay if you're able to, crossing your fingers and hoping the new medication is, in fact, close enough to your usual one, while dreading the thought of doing this all again next month. So why is this happening? Like so many modern societal ails, this is one the pandemic made a whole lot worse. When the world shut down in 2020, telemedicine became all the rage, which is great. You could talk to a doctor and get a professional diagnosis, plus maybe a prescription, without even leaving your couch. Of course, with everyone cooped up, working and schooling and doing literally everything from within the confines of their homes, concentration was harder. And you know what helps concentration? ADHD medications. So, telemedicine doctors prescribe them. A lot of them. In fact, after 3 straight years of Adderall prescription increases hovering around 5%, in 2021, they doubled to more than 10% and went even higher in 2022. Which was probably fine, because the makers of these medications can just make more, right? Wrong. Because on top of pandemic manufacturing interruptions, the ingredients in Adderall and similar products are controlled substances, and the DEA sets nationwide limits on them, based on how many people used them the year before. So for months, Adderall demand has far outpaced supply, and that shortage has sent people scrambling for alternative ADHD medications, which of course created a supply issue for those as well. So when's it going to get better? Well, it doesn't look like anytime soon. Despite the FDA confirming these shortages and some manufacturers saying they don't have enough of the active ingredients to make more, the DEA says it has no intention of increasing amphetamine limits. According to them, there's still plenty to meet the need. Guess they haven't tried to fill a prescription lately. One thing they are looking to do, though, is put an end to that whole telehealth prescription deal for ADHD medications and a few other prescriptions, meaning you'd have to see a doctor in person at least once for a diagnosis. So while that might help in the long term, for the short term, medical experts say get your backup plans in order. Work with your prescriber to find the best alternative options for you, because this is going to be the norm for at least the next few months.
Again, that was Connor Ruhalter reporting. And that's it for tonight. But come back tomorrow. We'll take a look at the state of inflation after the Silicon Valley Bank collapse and how you can keep your money safe. Plus, historian Elizabeth Cobb joins me on her latest book, Fearless Women, Feminist Patriots from Abigail Adams to Beyonce. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Crystal Haynes. Good night.
Years ago.